Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Ethicast. I'm your host, Bill Coffin, and with me today is Ethisphere CEO Erica Salmon Byrne to talk about the upcoming 2024 World's Most Ethical Companies applications process, and most notably, how the Ethics Quotient questionnaire, the heart of the application process, will reflect the ever-changing world of ethics and compliance itself. Erica, it's wonderful to see you again. Thank you so much for joining us.
Bill, thank you so much for having me. As always, it's a pleasure to chat with you.
So, the application period for the 2024 World's Most Ethical Companies is about to get underway.
Mhm.
Can you talk about some of the big regulatory trends from the last year that are reflected in the new Ethics Quotient questionnaire, especially in terms of how they have impacted what we now consider to be business integrity best practices?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the question, Bill. So, as longtime participants or longtime members of the Ethisphere community know well, we review the ethics quotient every year, and we traditionally will change it in between the announcement of the calendar year's world's most ethical companies and then when we actually open the application process for the next calendar year. Some years we change it a little bit, some years we change it a lot. Guess what, folks? This is a year we change it a lot. And the reason for that is because there's been a lot that's happening. And so the idea behind the ethics quotient is it is a way that we pull the pragmatic out of the theoretical. And we do that internally with the team of compliance experts that work here at Ethisphere. I was joking with my colleague Leslie Benton this morning that I did the math and we have something like 182 years of compliance experience between the various members of the team in terms of how long we've all been in the space. And we use that expertise to interpret what the regulators are saying. So obviously the regulations are generally written for any business, right? Anybody who's going to wind up in front of a regulatory body, the rules need to be written so that those ideas can be applied to companies of all sizes. We try to pull the pragmatic out of the theoretical and really give you a sense of what does it actually mean to do X, Y, and Z. So one of my favorite examples is, there's a line in the evaluation of corporate compliance programs about having compliance expertise on your board. What does it mean to have compliance expertise on your board, right? Does that mean you have somebody on your board who is the chair of an audit committee of another publicly traded company? Does it mean you have somebody on your board who's actually been a chief compliance officer? Does it mean you have somebody on your board who's been a CEO? And so one of the changes you'll see in this year's EQ is we're really getting very granular with those answer options so that we can get a real sense of the ways in which people are trying to position compliance expertise on their board. Repeat applicants know that's been a text question. That's now going to be a multiple select. So we've made a lot of those kinds of changes. We've added questions around clawbacks, so compensation changes. We've gotten much deeper into the questions around incentives. How are you making sure that you're setting employees up for success when it comes to ethical behavior? We have continued to edit the questions around manager training, really trying to get at that key question of are managers being trained to be strong ethical leaders? We have edited questions around performance evaluations for the people who are running the program, the ethics and compliance program. We've added a question around diversity with your board chairs. So, repeat applicants know well. We've long been asking questions around the diversity of your directors. So, how many, what is the profile of your independent directors? And the 2023 WME class broke the 30% threshold, which I was very excited to share broadly earlier this year. Now we've added a question about whether or not any of those diverse directors hold the key positions at the board level. So are they a lead independent director? Are they a committee chair, right? Are any of those kind of key positions in the hands of somebody who represents a diverse group for your organization? So those are some of the changes we've made. And then we fairly substantially edited the questions around conflicts of interest. And that is another area where, we have seen a lot of news coverage recently of different ways in which conflicts are rearing their ugly head. And so that was an area that we dug into for this year's EQ.
Now, can you talk about that a little bit more specifically? Because I know, like you just said, it's been in the news an awful lot. It's an area of great interest and great importance. And I'd be very curious to know kind of more specifically how those questions have changed. And I guess what is going to be expected of companies to really prove that they are indeed best of class in this area.
Yeah. So the place I'd like to start with that, Bill, is a little bit about why conflicts matter in the first place. Because I think in a lot of the coverage, particularly the coverage of some of what we've seen from, for example, the Supreme Court, there's been sort of a jump over that why step, right? We've gone straight to the salacious facts of what's been happening, and then both sides get dug in on whether it is or isn't a big deal, and nobody really stops to think, well, why do we require conflicts of interest to be disclosed in the first place? And at heart, the issue with the conflict of interest is, who are you acting on behalf of? Are you serving the mission and the people of the organization that you're representing, or are you serving yourself? And that is at the heart of conflicts of interest disclosures, and that is at the heart of this sort of concept of why conflicts matter, right? It's a question of trust. It's a question of reliability. It's a question of servant leadership, right? Are you serving the people in the organization, or are you serving yourself? And the challenge with conflicts is, if you don't disclose them, you lose a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. So hypothetically speaking, Bill, let's say that I decide that on the weekends I am going to volunteer for my local public radio station and hand out flyers. Mm-hmm. If I don't tell my colleagues at Ethisphere that I'm engaged in that activity, and it comes out later that I was handing out flyers, perhaps on an issue that most of the people at Ethisphere would disagree with, right? Was I representing Ethisphere when I did that? Or was I representing myself, right? And so the idea behind a conflict of interest is, it's not an issue to have a conflict. It's an issue to fail to disclose the conflict, right? Because if you disclose the conflict, there are ways that you can work around the conflict, and everybody involved who cares about it is going to understand. If you hide it, if you don't disclose it, if you say, well, I know there's nothing wrong with this, so why should I have to tell anybody? Then you find yourself in trouble down the road. And so, disclosure is one of those topics that we have been asking questions about for a while. Our Bella community asks questions of us about it all the time, right? It's one of those topics where people are trying to figure out what the right process and protocol is. And so that's part of the reason why we keep editing those questions, to try and get more and more information of how companies are doing it today and how could they potentially be doing it better, so that the broader public has faith in the organizations and institutions that it needs to trust.
So that last part you just said is really interesting, because I know, conflicts of interest, life is complex, and
Yes.
everybody usually has something that's worth disclosing to somebody somewhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you've got such a broad, area of experience here. I'd just be kind of curious to ask, when you have seen organizations where conflicts of interest kind of go broadly ignored and not really made a priority, what kind of harm does that do to the organization? Because it seems to me that it's not just a matter of you're calling your own credibility into question. You can undermine the faith in your mission, your vision, your values, the firmament of your organization. Have you seen that out there?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think anybody who opens the newspaper can see at one point or another some story about a situation in which somebody put their own interests ahead of the interests of the organization they were supposed to serve. Right? It's absolutely something that we see on a regular basis, and it's part of the reason why I'm in this work in the first place, Bill, because conflicts of interest is one of those things where it's nuanced. Right? There are some regulatory compliance areas that are pretty straightforward, right? And you put the control in place and people understand the control, they follow the control, they do what needs to be done, right? It's a relatively straightforward conversation. Conflicts is a little bit more complicated, because what seems like a conflict to me might not be a conflict to somebody in another part of the world. And so really making sure that we're having a conversation at the organizational level about why conflicts matter in the first place. Why it's so important that people trust that I'm putting the interest of the organization, ahead of my own interests. Why it matters to be seen as a fiduciary of the faith that people are putting in you. That's how you get a conversation going about doing the right thing. And that's again, part of what we're really aiming at with the work that we do here at Ethisphere.
Yeah, I think one of the most disheartening things when you see headlines being made about conflicts of interest or all kinds of corruption in general is that a lot more often, than we'd like to admit, that news is met with kind of a collective shrug. And so I guess that leads up my question to you, which is, why is it so important that there is something like the world's most ethical companies to celebrate and elevate truly excellent ethical business practice?
Yeah, I agree with you, Bill. More often than not, too often, things like some of the conflict stories we've seen in the news lately, it's either met with well, what's the big deal, or it's met with everybody does it, right? Everybody does it. It's this whole sort of, well, what aboutism? And it's part of the reason why I'm so proud of the work that we do around World's Most Ethical Companies, because the core of the World's Most Ethical Companies process is a firm belief on our part that these companies are going to outperform others in the long term, right? We're not asking people to make a binary choice between doing the right thing and doing the right thing for the business. They're the same thing. And the more we can make that case, the more we can help people see that, the more we can get people to understand that these practices actually lead to better organizations in the long run, the better. And so, it's the reason we've been doing World's Most Ethical Companies for now. This will be our 18th year honoring companies as part of the World's Most Ethical Companies process. And, it's for 18 years, we've really held firm to that idea that these practices are not a cost center, right? These are a business driver. These are a value creator. And the more we can get that word out there, the better.
Yeah. Now, I understand that this year the applications window opens a little earlier than it has in the past. So can you tell everybody, when does the applications window open, and where can people go to learn more about applying for the 2024 World's Most Ethical Companies?
Yes. So Bill, one of my goals for a long time has been to move the application process to be closer to a calendar year process, right? So historically speaking, we've opened it in August, we've closed it in November, we've notified people in February, and we've announced in March. This year, we're opening at the end of July. So this month, we're going to open the process at the end of this month. The webcasts to find out more about EQ changes or about applying, we've actually bifurcated them into 2 webcasts. So if you're a regular, repeat applicant, you can just come and listen to the talk about what's changed in this year's EQ. If you're brand new to the process, even if your company's applied before, but you've never done it, come to the second webcast too, which is about how to apply and tips and tricks and that sort of thing. Those are going to be the 1st and the 2nd of August. So process opens at the end of the month. 1st and 2nd of August are the big webcasts. We're going to close at the end of October, which then means we'll be able to notify closer to the beginning of the calendar year, which I'm very, very excited about, because that is going to be a much more natural cycle for us going forward. So anybody out there who is curious about the process, who wants to read the FAQs, who wants to look at the documentation guidelines, go to worldsmostethicalcompanies.com, and you can check out all of the information there. If you're interested in getting yourself ready for the process, Ethisphere has tons of resources available to you, and you can go to ethisphere.com to look at our resource library and check some of those resources out. But we're very, very excited about this year's Ethics Quotient. It's a great revamp of some historical questions to get at some developing practices. And then there's some really good new stuff in there too that we'll be able to share with everybody in terms of the data next year.
Very exciting. Well, I can't wait to see what comes out of this year's process. It's always fascinating to see the companies that are honored, and more importantly, the best practices they bring forward to kind of advance business ethics across the board. So it's always a very, very exciting procedure. So I'm eager to see it get underway. Erica, I learn something every time I speak with you. So thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today.
Absolutely. My pleasure, Bill, and take care, everybody.
Indeed, indeed. So once again, to learn more about the World's Most Ethical Companies, please visit worldsmostethicalcompanies.com. And if you are thinking of applying, and we sure hope that you will, please be sure to visit ethisphere.com and take advantage of the vast resource library we have there on demand. It's free, it's really terrific, and I think it'll help your practice and your applications process quite a bit. I'm Bill Coffin, and this has been the Ethicast. For more episodes, please visit the Ethisphere YouTube channel at youtube.com/Ethisphere. And if this is your first time enjoying the show, please make sure to like and subscribe either on YouTube or on any of our podcasting platforms at Apple, Spotify, Google, and Amazon Music. Thanks for joining us. And until next time, remember, strong ethics is good business.